Morning, this is the Eagletail Mountain Wilderness area, and I'm going to break here to talk some anime.
Giant Robo.
It's hard to take a collection of well-worn cliches and familiar archetypes and blend them with a new touch to create something that actually feels fresh and exciting again. Some examples from film include the original Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark, which embraced the hackneyed themes of past Saturday matinees and delivered new paradigms on them. Giant Robo wasn't quite that startling when it was released in 1992, but it was a minor milestone in anime. The OVAs embraced numerous anime cliches: giant robots, boy stars, costumed, superpowered heroes and cackling villains, secret bases, and dastardly plots to destroy the world. It wrapped all this in rapid-paced action, over-the-top melodrama, a retro art style, and a heroic orchestral soundtrack that wallowed joyously in its ancestors' footsteps. In an alternate future, the world now depends on an alternate energy source, the Shizma drive, which is cheap, plentiful, and green. It lights homes, powers planes, trains, and automobiles, and even cigarette lighters. But the perfection of the Shizma drive didn't come without a price. The first experiments resulted in a global disaster, a worldwide Chernobyl called the Tragedy of Beshtarl. In this world, a mixture of retro high-tech stylings, an evil group called Big Fire seeks world domination, led by a gang of superpowered men called the Magnificent Ten, and assisted by hundreds of literally faceless minions. Opposing Big Fire is the International Police Organization and their own gang of heroes, the Experts of Justice. These superheroes have been fighting it out for some time. But the IPO's biggest weapon, literally, is the title character, Giant Robo, the biggest, baddest robot on the planet. 10 stories tall, it's controlled only by young Daisaku Kusama, who got it from his father. Daisaku actually goes into fights standing on Giant Robo's shoulders. Hey, I warned you this was all about cliches. This time, Big Fire's scheme for world domination involves Professor Shizma, one of the inventors of the Shizma drive, and something initially mysteriously carried in just a briefcase. To rescue him, the IPO has dispatched a couple of their experts of justice. Ginrei, a leggy young woman whose powers are kept mysteriously as a last resort, and Tetsugu, a giant black whirlwind whose talent seems to be not getting the girl. We meet them amid some action. That mysterious briefcase Professor Shizma carried will soon be revealed to contain an anti-Shizma device, apparently created by a former colleague of Dr. Shizma, Dr. Franken von Folger. Folger was thought to have died in that decade-old disaster at Beshtarl, but apparently he's back and after a classic mad scientist revenge. The mastermind of Big Fire's plot seems to be a young man named Genya, whose mysterious past will only slowly be revealed. He's created a giant black sphere for himself, miles across, as his assault vehicle. This huge billiard ball is so ginormous, it not only dwarfs Giant Robo, it dwarfs cities. The plot will pit the IPO against Big Fire in a couple of huge and lengthy battles to stop the inexorable advance of this huge vulgar sphere across the planet. Slowly, Genya unveils his master plan to bring the whole world to a standstill. The story is very coy with revealing information, drawing each tidbit out for maximum drama. For example, people will look inside that briefcase and gasp in horror half a dozen times before someone will finally tell us what the heck is in there. Also, we'll be told the true story of that tragic day at Beshtarl in tiny pieces by several different characters, each seeming to have a slightly different perspective on the details. Plot twists and surprising revelations abound, and plenty characters on both sides will die, usually in grand heroic gestures. There are plenty more of these experts, the good guys, and Magnificent Ten, the bad guys, to provide us with a lot of individual fights and rivalries throughout the series. We don't meet some of them till the latter 2 episodes, and some of them who we meet early on won't survive until that long. Giant Robo's characters all take second place to the grand sweep of its story, but several of the experts, such as Ginrei, Tetsugu, and Taiso, get some time to grow on you. Of course, Daisaku is one of the main characters too, but he was far from my favorite. A couple of the bad guys, such as Genya and Alberto, get enough treatment to be interesting too. Director and screenwriter Yasuhiro Imagawa has infused each chapter of the story with a deliberate, exaggerated sense of melodrama, and he gives us plenty of cliffhangers and cheesy speeches. He pauses from time to time to give us little quiet moments to develop his favorite characters a little bit, and then he plunges right back into a desperate struggle. It's impossible to separate the high melodrama this story achieves from Masamichi Amano's incredible music score. He assembled a full orchestra and choir to bring his grandiose music to life, including several operatic arias. That provides a lot of the feeling of heroism, sadness, or melodrama associated with Giant Robo. Take, for example, This Fall of Paris. I love the way that music elevates this whole series up to a new plateau. You probably also noticed the art style of Giant Robo was a little unusual. The character art style has been left in an almost manga style with simple lines and exaggerated features. And the costumes of the experts in the Magnificent Ten are garish and outlandish, a mishmash of various styles. The artwork is all stylishly retro with sleek sci-fi designs of the past that cross a 1950s automobile with fins with the gleaming sci-fi pulp magazine imaginings of what the future might be like. We don't actually see many robots in the actual story itself. They're more in the actual opening than in the real OVAs, except for the title character, of course. But even those robots are all designed unapologetically outlandish and impractical. That retro artwork style actually has served the series well over the years. Since it intentionally looks like a throwback to begin with, it still looks fresh and original today. The animation was by a large collection of artists working for a Muse Video and an ad hoc collective known as Studio Mew. The animation, all hand-drawn, is stunning for an OVA of the period. It took almost 6 years to create the 7 Giant Robo OVAs that tell this story, with 5 years from the first Laserdisc release till the last episode finally came out. There were seemingly interminable waits between each episode. Those required substantial recaps at the start of some of the OVAs. Of course, today you don't have to wait between episodes anymore. Lucky you. The Giant Robo series began when the Japanese anime market was booming and the OVA market was at its height, but by the time it concluded, the bubble economy had burst and OVAs had fallen on hard times. Giant Robo has many influences and it displays them all proudly. It's inspired by the manga of Mitsutaro Yokoyama. An earlier live-action adaptation was called Johnny Sacco and His Flying Robot in the U.S. The anime also borrows from other Yokoyama characters and situations as well. You probably already noticed the similarities to Tessujin 28, which was dubbed Gigantor in the U.S. There was also a late appearance by Babel II. There are various visual and naming throwbacks to the classic story Water Margin as well. You don't actually need to know any of this in order to enjoy the show, though. I give Giant Robo 4.5 stars. It's a fun, hyperbolic anime OVA classic, infused with energy and a perfect watch with some popcorn. It's the progenitor of a lot of other retro anime attempts that were nowhere near as successful. Giant Robo was originally released in English by USMC. Their English dub was terrible. Media Blasters later re-released the entire DVD set and gave it a new, better-sounding English dub. Still, I've watched the series many times on the original Japanese Laserdiscs before there was a dub, and I don't think it's my bias towards the familiar that thinks the Japanese voices are still familiar at grasping the show's deliberate over-the-top style. Media Blasters DVD set also includes subtitled commentaries by several of the animation directors, storyboard artists, musicians, keyframe artists, and the voice cast for Daisaku and Ginrei. These were all recorded almost a dozen years after the first OVA's release, so they have some perspective on the show. Among the artists' frequent comments is, "I can't believe we drew all that by hand. It would have been so much easier with today's computers." Perhaps surprisingly, the director Imagawa isn't present for the commentaries, though everybody talks about him a lot. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of interesting information said in these commentaries, beyond pointing out who drew what specific scenes or what the in-jokes are in there.
Thanks for listening.